Good day, everyone. Welcome to our next episode of Music Works. And I'm happy to see again Katie Beardsworth, who is the creator of the season. And this is our last episode of season 1, right, Katie?
That's right.
And that's the episode with Naomi Paul. If you would please introduce the episode and just tell us briefly what this is about.
Absolutely. So I recorded this episode a few weeks ago with Naomi Paul, who is the Deputy General Secretary of the Musicians Union in the UK, and also Julia Rowan, who is works for the Ivors Academy, which is a guild body supporting composers and songwriters. And those two organisations have joined forces along with others to campaign for better remuneration from streaming royalties for musicians and music creators. The campaign was launched early in lockdown in sort of March, April time last year, when it became clear quite what a high proportion of their income musicians were losing by there being no live performances. A statistic that's, I think it's around at least 80% of musician income overall has been lost due to the loss of live performance. And with the amount of recorded music that is available and that is used constantly and frequently, that is there's a disconnect there. So the campaign was launched. It then went to a parliamentary select committee in the UK, which means that members of parliament have been hearing evidence, and the evidence has been really striking, and there's been a lot of big names in music of all genres who've stepped up and spoken to the inquiry about what the impact of this is on them. This is a current thing that's still going on, and you can watch the evidence on, I think it's on the BBC now, and it's also on Parliament TV. It's really, really interesting, and Naomi and Julia are right on the inside track, and in this episode they explain in detail the issues around streaming and streaming royalties, what it means for musicians, what proportions of the money is doled out, really kind of detailed information about this issue. So if this affects you in any way, I would strongly recommend listening to it. It's detailed at times, and I found it fascinating, but it's really, really crucial and relevant information.
I just want to add that if it does not affect some musicians currently at the moment, the way the digital world is developing, we are all getting more involved with it. So if it doesn't affect, immediately and very strongly someone at the moment, those people have a great advantage of watching and listening to those advices and this expertise being shared with them, because that would help them to get their channels set up more properly, to have their visibility organized in ways which will produce much better organized stream of income in the future. Because right now, of course, there's a lot of chaotic and disorganization in the field, but these things can be set up by musicians and by their managers initially much better. Of course, you can always go back and change how your channel works and how you communicate with others who use your music, but that's a second approach and double work. If you learn from already accomplished musicians and from people who already know how that should be done better, you have a tremendous advantage over being in control of your future.
Absolutely, it should impact every working musician at some point, and if you don't think it's going to at the moment, then I'm sure it will in the future.
Yes. Katie, thank you very much for being a wonderful guest. It's a great pleasure to see you again. And thank you for bringing this enormous source of great information for musicians. We really need it. Thank you for going on and continuing with it.
Thank you, Anna. It was a pleasure.
Yep. And we'll go on to the episode now.
Hello and welcome to Music Works, a podcast by Polyphony Arts. We're talking about the future of the classical music industry with some great guests. Thank you for joining us. Hello and welcome to Music Works. Today I'm joined by Naomi Pole, the Deputy General Secretary of the Musicians Union, and Julia Rowan from the Ivers Academy. Hello to both of you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi there.
Hi
Thanks for
there.
having
Thanks
us.
for having us.
Today we're going to talk about streaming and streaming royalties and the impact that they have on musicians. This is something that in my experience is not well understood amongst musicians sometimes in the industry. So I'm very pleased to have these two experts here to explain it to us and to talk about the issues that we should be aware of. So with that, let's dive straight in. And Julia, I wondered if you could explain to us streaming royalties and how musicians make money from them.
Yes, of course. And I mean, Naomi, do jump in if there's something that I forget. But I think, just broadly speaking, writers, so the people who compose or write the music, get paid differently to, let's say, performers. So a writer would get paid through PRS, the collecting society, whereas an artist would get paid by their label they're signed to. If they're a featured artist, if they're a non-featured artist, then they get nothing from streaming. And just broadly, the way royalties are divided is the streaming platform generally retains about 30% of gross revenue. The publishing, so songwriter plus publisher, get about 13 to 15% combined. And then the remaining 55 to 57% goes to the label, who then shares some of that with their artist. They're assigned to them depending on individual deals. So the amount that the artist would get from the label depends from the deal that they've signed, which means it's usually, I would say, around potentially 15 to 20%. If you've got a good deal, it could be that the label is giving you 30% of the income they get from streaming. Some huge big artists are on 50-50 deals, or actually 50-50 deals are quite common with independent labels. But from what we hear, not so common from major labels. And that's more or less how it would work. I don't know if you, Naomi, want to add something around the recoupment deal or how deals with artists work.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a particular issue really with kind of heritage artists who probably have a double whammy of being on a low royalty rates. They might be getting as low as 10%, but also they may not have ever recouped their advance. So essentially, as part of the streaming inquiry, Tom Gray from Gomez was saying that he still gets no streaming royalties whatsoever because he remains unrecouped. And the thing is that all of the money generated by a track or an album is essentially paid for by the artist out of their royalty percentage. So it's kind of offset against any royalties they might have received. So artists obviously need that upfront investment in a lot of cases from a label, but then they end up paying it back, and they would have to pay back all of the costs of recording. And there are sometimes very unreasonable deductions as well, like a deduction for breakage, which is something that would have applied to physical product like vinyl or CDs being broken. And sometimes it's still applied to digital, even though clearly it shouldn't do. So there's still some pretty outrageous deals that still exist that artists are still effectively working under.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I think on the songwriter side, what we're seeing a lot of the time is songwriters investing a lot in the creation of a track or of a song. So in the recording and the mixing and the developing artists, if it's a songwriter who's not an artist as well, but who works with an artist. So there's this whole side where you're putting in time, a studio, a series of expenses. If you're a songwriter who's not also a featured artist, then you would have to, spend X amount of time, X amount of days with the artist, providing all the usual teas and coffees and lunch and this and that and the other. And then you would have to create this sort of kind of finished product, almost this sort of demo it's called, but it's pretty much done and dusted. And this is all at your own expense. And then that could be chosen or not by the label or the artist. They could choose to use it or not. And then if they do, the royalty you're getting is, if it's just one songwriter, then it's about more or less half, a bit more than half of 13% of the entirety of the money that music makes from streaming. But also, let us not forget that there's a lot of the time there are about 15 to 20 songwriters on a track, especially for successful, big high-profile artists. They have songwriting camps and things like that. So, I mean, for us, we definitely think that the song, so the amount that goes to the publishing, should definitely be valued more, should be higher, based on just how important the creation of the music is and how much goes into it in terms of investment.
Absolutely.
And also how much, the listeners love the song. At the end of the day, when you listen to a track, what you want to listen to is the performance and the song. So that, they're the two key elements as far as we're concerned. And yet most of the money is actually going to the major labels and staying there, not being paid out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Naomi, tell us about the fixed streaming campaign then.
Yeah, so the MU and Ivers Academy got together, and I think following on from the Broken Record campaign, which Tom Gray started, we felt that during the COVID crisis, when the live industry is completely closed, it was really clear that our members' income had disappeared overnight, and that the money they make from recorded music is so negligible that it's not playing its part in kind of propping up careers and sustaining careers. And it's been really clear actually how much artists make from the live side of the business. And I think in a lot of cases it's about 90% of their income comes from live. So we decided it was a really good moment to actually try and raise awareness of how little streaming pays. And we got together and mounted the fixed streaming campaign, and what we called for was a government review of streaming, and what we've ended up with is a select committee inquiry on the economics of streaming. So obviously we're super excited about that, and the first oral sessions went really well. And you hear from artists actually saying, like Nadine Shah, who's obviously got a massive following, a big fan base, she's a successful artist, saying that she doesn't make enough money, and at the moment she's really struggling to pay her bills. It's pretty shocking. And I think the select committee were really found all the arguments really compelling.
Yeah, I think they were definitely receptive. They kept reiterating how shocked they were, which was it was interesting, because I think it was important to get the message out there.
Absolutely, it sounds as though it was certainly worthwhile doing it. These things are so often not well understood, are they, until they're brought to light. So what happens when you have a select committee inquiry? What status is it at the moment?
Well, they called for written evidence. So I think they've had huge amounts of written evidence submitted, and we were encouraging our members to put evidence in, because really you want to hear from individual artists, individual songwriters saying, this is how little I make, because that's the strongest evidence, really. And we wanted people to submit copies of their contracts, copies of royalty statements, things that we wouldn't necessarily have access to, but our individual members would. So we've got the written evidence stage, and I think people can still submit until the 11th of December. Is that right, Julia?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they've extended.
And then there's the oral evidence sessions. So we've had a day of oral evidence sessions already. There's going to be at least one other day of oral evidence, possibly more. And then we wait to see what comes out in the report. And obviously we're hoping for some really good recommendations that then, I guess the challenge, if you do get some good recommendations in the select committee's report, is to then make sure the government actually takes those on board.
Yeah, that's right. I think.
Sorry.
No. I just think that's exactly. So there's the written evidence process, and there's the oral evidence process, and when the sort of evidence submission is over, then the select committee puts together a report which compiles recommendations to government, which government can then choose to take on or not. But it's that will also, so it doesn't really end with the evidence giving. There's also a whole part after that where we need to make sure that sort of the change we want to see actually does happen.
Yeah, to make sure the report just doesn't get written and then not acted upon. Is that basically the idea? Yeah.
Absolutely. Because,
Exactly.
I mean, the Treasury, I think it was the Treasury Select Committee actually wrote a report about the gaps in the government support schemes and the fact that so many freelancers had fallen through the gaps, including our members and Ivors Academy members. But those recommendations haven't been taken forward. So that's the next challenge, I guess. We got the inquiry, we see what comes out in the report, and then we have to make sure that something actually happens after that.
Absolutely, often the most challenging stage. Fingers absolutely crossed for a good result there. And you said that people can still submit evidence until the 11th of December, is that right? So this comes out on the 6th, so we can put information there about how people can submit as well. So there's obviously still time to do that. I certainly know that my networks have been submitting. I've seen it all over the place, which is good. So you mentioned Broken Record, which is the campaign that came before fixed streaming, is that right? Would you like to tell us a bit about that? Either one of you is fine.
Yeah, I mean, I can have a quick go. I mean, I think there was just growing frustration. I mean, so at the Ivors, we've been talking about how badly streaming pays creators for a long, long time. So I think that's, we've just been hearing from our members about just how sort of woefully insufficient streaming payments are for a long time. But I think what happened was, as Naomi was saying earlier, with the disappearance of live overnight due to sort of the outbreak of COVID, I think it was just suddenly so, it just came to the forefront, right? The whole way the streaming system works and how flawed it is was just suddenly painfully evident. Not that it wasn't earlier to our members, as I was saying, but I think Tom Gray, who's the founder of the Broken Record campaign, just sort of decided to start talking about it even more and to just, do something about it. So yeah, it was really good because it was incredible how much traction how much support he got from fellow creators from the get-go, which sort of showed how much this was on people's minds, really.
Absolutely, and I think the sudden disappearance of live music overnight really did highlight a lot of slightly rocky areas in the music industry, to say the least, in terms of the fragility of musicians' incomes and how money is made and so on. So, I think that has to be a positive thing, as much as it's been so difficult over this time. I'm really hopeful that that understanding will lead to better outcomes and a stronger and more robust industry. We certainly hope. So let's talk more about the major issues in this topic then, about streaming and streaming royalties. So let's talk about pricing.
This is a controversial one. This is actually something that kind of, I think the Broken Record campaign kind of really focused in on the fact that the price of streaming hasn't gone up. If you look at Spotify's price for premium, it hasn't gone up in 10 years. And how many models are there like that? If you look at the audio-visual equivalents like Netflix and Disney Plus, and Amazon Prime, they have managed to put their prices up over that same period. So I guess when you're looking at the fact that that streaming's not generating enough money for creators and performers, then you have to look at, are they actually charging a fair price, and why has the price not gone up? And there is an element of the fact that YouTube doesn't pay appropriate license fees, and it is effectively a music streaming platform, even though it doesn't see itself that way, which is convenient because it gives it a get out clause in terms of actual payment for copyright material, which is one of the things that I think will probably come out in this inquiry as well. But obviously, if the price of Spotify Premium went up, there's more chance of getting a fairer deal for artists and creators. So I think that is something that we've slightly shied away from pushing for, because we know it's not a good time for consumers to have any kind of price rises, because there's, you know, record unemployment ahead and a recession coming. But you have to look at the reasons why the price hasn't gone up for so long, and clearly there's a problem with the market if that's the case.
Absolutely. And with pricing, we always touch on value, obviously. Julia, what are your thoughts on the value? You mentioned in the chat we had before this about the value of the song.
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, I think the idea that the price hasn't gone up since 2008 actually means it's gone down in real terms with inflation, right? So that's in itself worrying. I mean, even though streaming is this, you know, it's great, it's wonderful, it's saved the industry from widespread piracy and illegal downloads that certainly weren't paying creators at all. But you know, it doesn't mean that it's perfect, and it doesn't mean it can't be you know, structured or changed in ways that can make it more equitable. And to that point, as I was saying earlier, you know, you have this split of royalties that largely derives from a time in which physical distribution was kind of the main, you know, the main distribution, basically the main way of distributing music. And therefore you had direct sale of records. And who put in most investment in that? The labels. So they would, you know, manufacture, ship, and distribute all these sort of physical copies. Now the cost of distribution has gone incredibly down because it's all digital, right? But in some way, even though the value of the song has gone up since, to us it seems odd that there should be such a high discrepancy, let's say, between the publishing side and the recording side, where one is valued at more or less 13% and the other is valued at more or less 57%. And we definitely think, as Naomi was saying earlier, that, you know, when you listen to music, there's probably two elements that really make you like it, that really capture you, and they're the song, the composition, how it's written, and how it's performed. And yes, marketing and distribution are important, but are they so important that that the value of the song should be kept so low? So yeah, I think we would like to see it go up. And I mean, there are definitely, it's going that way, and there are definitely positive efforts in the industry for it to go up. But we definitely think the situation at present isn't an accurate sort of you know, an accurate division of rewards.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we totally agree with that.
Yeah. Often happens when musicians are sometimes not the best people at marketing themselves, because they're the people that are creating the music, and other people do the marketing, but then they're the ones that set the price distribution. So yeah. So what's the MU's take on that, Naomi? Do you have anything to add?
Well, we fully support the song being valued more highly. And I think, you know, one of the problems here is the major labels basically dominating the market. And the fact that the major labels effectively own and control the major publishers, you could argue that has an effect where it actually suppresses the value of the song, because it makes the negotiation that much more difficult on the publishing side. So we have talked about regulatory or statutory licensing, which is a potential solution, but it's something that I think is quite controversial, because you're essentially saying the government would set the rates and they potentially could stay fixed for a very long period of time. So even if we managed to get probably more like 25% for the song, which would be much more reasonable, and I think we'd be very happy with an uplift like that, I think the risk is that you know, either you don't get that and you get a bit less, or you do get it and then it's fixed for the next decade or more. So it's a risky strategy, and not something that we've particularly gone for. I think we'd rather see the industry come together and actually agree on a fairer split, but how realistic that is at this stage, we don't know.
And do you have an idea of what a fair split would be? Is that something that the campaign is recommending, or are you just sort of trying to open up the conversation and see if you can reach?
Well, we have talked about it, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. I mean, I don't think we're being too prescriptive about it. I think there's general guiding principles. So for one, we think there should be definitely a form of parity between the publishing and the recording side, just because it seems a little bit arbitrary that there isn't. But so kind of broadly speaking, that's where we're seeing things going. But I don't think we have it nailed down to the decimal. Do we, Naomi?
No, we don't. But we also, on the performer side, want to see a share go to PPL to be paid out. This is where, if you've got a lot of orchestral musicians listening, this is potentially something that could really benefit them. So, I guess there's a lot of different stakeholder groups here. So we've got the featured artists, trying to get them a better deal, trying to deal with the issue of recoupment. Then there's the songwriter and the publisher side. We want to get a greater share for the song. And then there's the non-featured performers who currently get nothing. And orchestral musicians would fall into that camp, where if we manage to get some money paid via PPL, then that would be a brand new income stream for them.
Yeah, I have a client who I was talking to about this the other day, and he was saying he's been doing orchestral and chamber music recordings for his entire career for 40 years and has never once made a single penny from streaming or performance rights. So, yeah, not very much in agreement with that.
At the moment, for radio broadcasts, for example, PPL collect a share. They take a license fee and then they divide it between the labels and the performers, and the featured performers get 65% and the non-featured performers get 35%. And essentially we'd like to see a similar, so you could either do it like that and kind of treat it like radio royalties, and we would argue that streaming is a lot like radio, particularly because of playlisting. It's not like a sale. It's not like buying a CD. It's very much like radio, or could be like rental, which again attracts equitable remuneration because it's something you're paying for on a monthly basis, and then you have access to this whole library of music. So yeah, we very much feel it's not sales. The other way of addressing the issue would be not as equitable remuneration, but in Europe, because of the EU copyright directive, there a lot of territories are now putting in place appropriate and proportionate remuneration, which is something that's collected directly from the platform and goes to PPL. And it wouldn't be split with the labels, so it would be something that would just be for performers. And I think in Spain, where they've got this up and running, I think there's about between 2.5% and 5% that comes direct from the platform, and it hasn't impacted on the money that's paid to the other rights holders. So at the moment, that's something in Spain that's just coming direct from the platform. So that could be another potential solution. And I guess for us, that might be slightly better because it's just for the performers. It's not divided with the labels. And again, I think the IVAs are kind of broadly supportive of this, but obviously it's not something that would directly benefit songwriters.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're fully in support of a guaranteed income stream for performers from streaming, which would directly flow through a collecting society, especially because I think broadly speaking, collecting societies are sort of held to standards of transparency, accountability, and certain limitations and standards in distribution policy that are actually very positive, even though they might not always be efficient, even though they might be, specific PROs might be flawed, but generally speaking, PROs or collecting societies in general, but generally speaking, we would be in favour of sort of a direct income stream through a collecting society to performers. But obviously, it's not really our constituency, so it's not really for us to speak to.
But the other thing about the other thing about collecting societies is that they're held to quite high standards of due diligence. So if they hold money for somebody and they don't have their contact information, they have to take several steps to try and find that person. Whereas if a label receives a royalty and doesn't have any contact information for that artist anymore, do they make any steps to try and locate them, or is it in their interest to just keep the money? I mean, I honestly don't know, because I'm not party to the efforts that a label would go to, and I think maybe it depends on the label whether they would really try hard to find that person or not. But I think there ought to be some standards in place.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a sort of there's a perception as well of I think it's certainly amongst classical music, of these things being a bit troublesome to get involved with, which I don't think is any reflection whatsoever on the collection organisations or any of it really. It's almost a bit like how people don't like paying taxes. Like, they just don't want to pay extra unseen costs for things that they don't feel like they're immediately receiving. I know that in committee meetings for music organisations that I've worked for, they've gone out of their way to try and avoid using music that's in copyright, so they don't have to pay a PRS kind of. And I just think that's just leaves so artistically bereft in so many ways to have that aim. But nonetheless, it's one that's quite kind of frequently held, I think, is that this is a sort of unnecessary cost that you could incur. Are you finding that you're having to sort of change hearts and minds with that, or are you dealing more with the industry's perspective? I don't know if that's something that's, part of this whole issue from your point of view at all.
I think that's something we come up against quite a lot, isn't it, in all sorts of different areas of the industry. And for us, I mean, we see collective licensing as being a massive positive. So we'd like to think people would engage with it. And I know PPL have made great efforts in recent years to get orchestral musicians to sign up as performer members, for example, and make sure that they do get those income streams.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I think there are so-called disruptors out there in the industry who potentially see the exclusive assignment of rights to a PRO, or just the whole system of going through having to obtain a license to use music as an obstacle or a faff. But obviously we would say that these are incredibly important safeguards for music and for music creation. They probably should be streamlined and made easy and accessible and efficient to the user, absolutely, but definitely have a really important place.
Yeah, I completely agree. I really think that that as you mentioned, Naomi, there are several areas of the music industry that this kind of viewpoint comes into play, and people see things that are there as a safeguard as more of a headache, and it's just something that occurred to me. It's something that I come across all the time, actually. And do you think that, and I've gone off script a bit here, so I apologise for that, do you think that the systems from the point of view of music creators and music performers, the systems for registering with these companies and so on, they're perceived, in my experience, as being complicated and difficult to deal with? Do you think that they are, and that needs to be easier, or do you think that that's more of a perception? Because I found several of them really easy to deal with once I've actually picked up the phone, and so I'm interested to hear your view.
I mean, I would agree, to be honest with you. I think mostly I speak to musicians who a lot of the time I think have a perception of it being very difficult and then just get it done very quickly. So I would tend to think it is currently quite easy and cost effective, but I guess it depends.
It should be. It definitely
It definitely should
should
be,
be.
but I definitely think it's not. It's not too bad, is it?
No, and I think that they will. Like, I think both PRS and PPL would walk you through it if you were trying to join. Like, they really want you to
Yeah.
join. So there's no incentive for them to have any barriers to people joining and registering works and registering their performances. So, you know, and also we'll walk members through it. So please, I would hope that anyone listening who's not registered with PPL and PRS, who should have done, please can I encourage you to do that? Because firstly, it's the only way we're going to ever have better data on who performs on tracks and who has written music. But also, you know, it's money that actually belongs to you. So I would sign up because, you know, it's a chance of royalties at the end of the day.
And I would encourage as well writers who don't have a publisher to also sign up to MCPS, because that's a whole portion of royalties that if you have a publisher, it goes to the publisher, but if you don't, then you could be getting.
Exactly, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have to say that is my experience as well, is that it feels like a lot of work, perhaps if you've not done it before, but actually when you engage with these companies, that they do make it easy for you. That's certainly what I've found. So I'll just add my encouragement there to anyone listening who's thinking about signing up. Right, let's carry on talking about, I can't really enjoy getting into this issue, I have to say. It's so interesting and so important. So bad data, tell me about bad data and the impact that has.
Well, there was a report done called Music 2025, which was actually a kind of research project backed by the Intellectual Property Office, which highlighted that we have a problem with data in the music industry. And at the end of the day, the collection societies they're only as good as the data they have, right? They can only pay out accurately if they actually know who to pay. And there's a big problem with data not being very well linked. So the data on recordings held by PPL and the data on musical works held by PRS, historically that those two haven't really matched up. But I know there's a massive project going on to try and make that happen, which would be enormously useful. And, you know, again, I think the record labels have a part to play because they don't necessarily give the full list to PPL. And if they did that, you know, it would be a minor change from their perspective, but it would make a massive difference to performers.
Exactly. And I think that from there as well, because you have the sort of copyright data, which are these codes that are associated with either the song, the composition and the recording, and issues with, you know, interoperability of database systems across the world, and, you know, these sort of exciting issues. But then there's also usage data, sort of vis-a-vis the copyright data. So there's also a problem of with DSPs giving accurate and good data to.
What are DSPs?
Sorry, digital service providers.
Right.
So, well, streaming platforms, essentially. So, you know, Apple Music, Spotify, Tidal, whoever it is. But so if the better and the more data they provide to those paying creators, then obviously the better they get paid. So there's kind of these two sides of the data issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So how about, you mentioned the record labels and the impact that they have. Is this, surely the deals must have a big impact on this as well. Because it's all very individual, isn't it? The agreements that are made. Do you want to tell us a bit about that? I'm not sure who to go to.
Yeah, I think
take a pick.
I'm sure we both have plenty to say on this subject.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I think something that's come out again in the oral evidence sessions so far in the inquiry has been the dominance of the major labels and the fact that the licensing deals with the digital service providers, the platforms that are covered by non-disclosure agreements. So it's difficult to get to the bottom of what's being paid and also how much of it is actually paid out by the labels. And I mentioned the fact that they kind of control the publishers as well, so that's another problem.
Right.
Yeah, I think we just feel that a significant portion of the money that's paid out by streaming platforms goes to the labels, and the major labels doesn't necessarily go any further. And probably the more ethical deals are quite often offered by independent labels as well.
Yeah, I mean,
that's
there's sorry,
No, carry on.
there's just this web, right, of licensing deals that are happening between the various intermediaries, which would be these companies who sit in between the music creators and the streaming platforms. So the intermediaries do licensing deals with the streaming platforms. They license their repertoire to the streaming platforms. And these deals are covered by NDAs, which is, I mean, unfortunate in terms of the fact that allows a lot of information to be hidden, but understandable within a sort of free market, because they're needed obviously for competition. The issue is as well that the licensing music isn't the only thing that's going on. So we know anecdotally that there are sort of certain commercial arrangements that happen in these deals. So, you know, sort of marketing revenue or money in kind being given in lieu of basically, or in exchange of a lower royalty rate. But the point is that if the major label is getting that money, then they will be happy with that deal. But that money that is agreed upon isn't necessarily money that then trickles down to the creators that they do the deal on behalf of. So it's quite complicated, and there are a lot of interests at play, which kind of, at least from our perspective, it really seems like it's difficult to understand what capacity that intermediary is doing the deal in, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's tricky, and all we want really is for creators' interests to be represented lawfully, as they should be, contractually.
The contracts are very complicated often, aren't they? And, you know, extremely difficult to understand. There's certainly the chain of events, or the chain of
the so-called value chain, right? Like the chain,
right, yeah.
the money, the value that's going from when the music is created to all the steps it needs to go through and then come back. But yeah.
Absolutely.
One of the MPs in the inquiry session the other day actually said it sounds like the major labels have basically formed a cartel. To which I think the artist said, we couldn't possibly comment. But it's interesting because, you know, clearly is a theme that's emerged, and the MPs were straight on that. They could really see what the problems were. So yeah, I'm kind of fascinated. If you have time to tune in to the next oral evidence sessions, it really makes very good viewing indeed.
It does. I would recommend even watching the first one, because it's still up there on the committee's website on Parliament Live TV. So you can definitely just watch it back whenever you want, and watch the second one live on the 8th of December. Yeah, I would recommend it because it's just interesting to see the interaction, to see these sort of artists really put themselves out there, just in order, as Nadine said, to protect fellow artists like her as well. And then the reaction of the MPs.
It's not easy for musicians to do that, because there's a lot of murkiness, as you know, in the industry, and there's a lot of kind of appearance of making lots of money or having a certain, you know, money and status is all very confused, and, you know, that's part of it. And then, you know, I know... So yeah, I had press requests come through my agency at the beginning of lockdown to talk about the impact on musicians' income, and a lot of my clients were not willing to talk about that, and I can completely understand why, although I wish they would. One of the reasons why I talk about it instead. But yeah, it's really difficult for people to do that, I think. Although I'm sure the fact that it's such an important and public inquiry is really helpful.
Well, from the MU's perspective, we had one of our delegate conferences. We have every 2 years. We have a conference conference where our members can kind of vote on motions, and it's very trade union thing, but essentially they're influencing the policy of the union going forward. And we had a motion on the union backing user-centric royalty distribution, and that went through. So that is actually formal MU policy, and it is something we're really keen on, and we know it would go down really well with consumers, but it's not something we're necessarily putting forward as something the inquiry could look at, because I think it's more of an industry solution rather than something that the government could recommend. But yeah,
So
should we explain?
What would it mean? Yeah, exactly.
Julia, if you want to explain it?
Yeah, for sure. So the way streaming pays out currently is, say any given month, so say the month of November 2020, right, on Spotify, all the money from subscriptions is pooled together, and then this money is divided and paid out based on the number of plays to sort of all the rights holders on a track, essentially, according to obviously the splits and yada, yada, yada. So this user-centric would change this distribution policy, which is called pro rata. So it doesn't act on the splits between the different rights holders, but it acts on the distribution of the money from the streaming platform to rights holders. What does that mean? It means the user-centric, under user-centric, you would have the money that a user or a consumer pays for their monthly subscription. So say that £9.99. Aside from the money that the platform retains, which is around £3 out of the £9.99, the rest of it would be divided exclusively between the tracks that consumer has listened to that month, right? So if I listen to one album 1 month, then all of my £7 go to that album and, the rights holders on that album, right? Which, as we've said, 13% here, 57% there. Currently, it's not like that. Currently, your money just goes into that big pool, and then that big pool gets divided up. User-centric, I think for us at the Ivors is great. We support it. It sounds definitely fairer than the current system, because it sort of it gives back agency to the consumer, right? And this sort of power of choice, and the relation. It fosters the relationship between fan and artist. The only issue with user-centric, I think, for us is that although it's said that it would rebalance sort of distortions arising from the pro rata system, it seems that actually, from modelling that has been done, it seems that it wouldn't really shift around revenue that much. So it doesn't seem to really go at the heart of the remuneration problem in benefiting the long tail. There's no conclusive evidence that it will, basically. So for us, great. I mean, we're definitely in favor of it, but we're acutely aware of the fact that other things will be needed as well in order, for creators to be paid fairly, essentially.
No, would it be the splits that would be the problem? If you took exactly the same situation now and put it through the user-centric system, then it still comes back as the splits being the issue. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And basically what we've been talking till now, right? So, what we've been talking about. So bad data is definitely at the heart of people not getting paid accurately what they deserve, money that their music generates. Definitely this lack of clarity around distribution policies of major music groups and major music intermediaries. So a lot could be done there to ensure that they are faithfully representing their creators' interests. And yes, copyright protections could definitely be improved in the UK so that creators are paid fairly. There's a lot that could be done, definitely.
Absolutely. Do you want to talk a bit more about copyright?
Sure, yeah. Okay. So in 2019, we campaigned for the European Copyright Directive to be approved, which it was. And so then the European Union gave member states 2 years to implement it into national legislation. But the UK isn't bound to implement it anymore because of, the exit from the European Union happening on 31st December. So that's before the deadline for implementation. So we're not bound to do it. And the UK government have said that they don't want to implement it. Now, in the European Copyright Directive, there were some really important protections, really important provisions around creators' rights and liability of online platforms. It was really an important update on legislation of the online of the music digital marketplace, let's say. So I think in terms of copyright, there are a lot of things that could be done in the UK as well to even improve on that and to make the UK a really good place for creativity to happen, for creators to want to put their rights. And well, what Naomi was saying, appropriate and proportionate remuneration, awarded contractually. We would always want to see that when a creator signs a contract, licensing or assigning rights, that they would be awarded what is appropriate and what is proportionate remuneration. So a fair share, basically, then a fair share that they would get every time their music generates money. Then I mean, it's a long list. I'll try and keep it short. Okay, liability of online platforms, copyright infringement. Platforms such as YouTube should be considered responsible when there's copyright infringement, because currently they're not. And that creates a big problem because there's kind of this lack of attribution of responsibility, which means that it's a bit of a anything goes type of situation. I mean, it's not, this is very simplistic, but I'm trying to summarize.
I've always thought that was odd though, because my son watches Thomas the Tank Engine religiously on YouTube, and sometimes people make their own and they're like, this was just made for YouTube, it's not a real thing, it was just made for YouTube. And I was like, yeah, and all the millions of people that watch YouTube. I was like, what do you mean just for YouTube? Anyway, as an aside, and it's always really weird anyway, but to be avoided.
Kids will watch anything on YouTube, won't they? Apparently there's a whole thing of kids watching Kinder eggs be opened by other children.
Yes, I heard about that. It's really weird. My son's obsessed with trains, and when we've just moved to Newcastle over the summer, and he got obsessed with the Newcastle Metro, and we watched, there were YouTube videos where you go all the way around the Metro, and he's 4, he was watching these like documentaries about the Metro, but which in some ways was preferable to some of the things that he could have been watching.
Well, I think things like that are fairly harmless, but the problem with YouTube is when like young people favour listening to music on YouTube and aren't paying for Spotify Premium, and YouTube isn't licensed properly because it's not licensed like a streaming platform. Exactly. So there's the value gap, this big hole in the money that we should all be receiving.
Completely. So it holds so much power because if people want their music heard, they put it on YouTube.
Exactly. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's kind of this combination of it being this sort of model which doesn't really remunerate creators well, but at the same time creators having to put their music on there, having to put their rights there because they're such a dominant player in the market. So it's a bit problematic. I mean, and again, all of these platforms, are great in terms of getting your music out there and exposure and getting heard, but really we would like to see our members being sort of remunerated fairly for their work.
This is really, really critical to the major problem that musicians face, is that there seems to be this huge disconnect between exposure and being paid. Yeah. And it's just this enormous gap that we're always trying to close. I'm always trying to close anyway.
Definitely.
I'm sure you guys are as well.
You're preaching to the choir, Katie.
Yeah, I know. Oh, absolutely. I could go on talking about all this all day, but I know that we've got to wrap it up quite soon. But I'm dying to hear what more about algorithmic curation, which is on our list of of issues, and I know this is something that I've had limited experience with, and would love to hear your perspectives on.
Well, I think that comes back to major label dominance as well, because if they can pay for and control the algorithms, they can make sure that their music is pushed, and therefore an even greater share ends up with the major labels. And it means that independent artists are kind of priced out of the market, and they're not getting the level of exposure that they deserve, so they're not getting the level of royalties that they deserve. And also we'd say that curated playlists are very much like radio. So again, if you put on a kind of great British breakfast playlist or something, this one that I may have chosen myself recently, which is why it's the only one that came to mind. But you get a load of tracks and you just listen to them, and there's a kind of theme rather than it being like when I actually select an album that I want to listen to. And so if the labels could control what gets into the playlist, then again they're receiving more of the money. So this is the problem again of market dominance and the fact that not everyone's getting a fair share.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, essentially, wherever there's this sort of algorithmic curation involved, so wherever there's AI sort of kind of determining the music that you listen to, I think we need to ensure, and in fact, there's actually a global trend in whereby the legislators in the EU and the US, they're all sort of looking at how AI works, and they sort of all agree that there should be oversight of how it works in order to ensure that it's not biased, that it's not discriminatory, that it's not that it's not inhibiting cultural diversity. Because let's not forget, there's always someone who writes the algorithms, right? So they might be, in a way, building their own bias into the algorithm. So we definitely need to ensure that this isn't happening. And also, to what Naomi was saying, the fact that streaming is a bit of a shop window, right? You open a streaming platform and there's certain things that you see, certain playlists or whatever. And we want to ensure from our side that everyone has more or less equal access to the market, right? And that means that you are able to put your music up there and for it to be reasonably I mean, I know you can search for it and find it, but if the model goes more and more towards, the radio feature or me listening to just whacking on a playlist and that sort of thing, that's absolutely fine. But how do we ensure that at the same time, the sort of smaller artists or independent artists and music creators and songwriters are still able to access the same possibilities?
Absolutely, because it makes all the difference, doesn't it? The playlisting makes all the difference. Well, thank you for explaining that. That's well, it's a big topic, isn't it? To say the least. I'm slightly daunted on your behalf by what you've taken on, but I think it's just so important. We've got one thing left on our list of issues, which is length of a stream, which, Julia, you mentioned might particularly be important to our classical listeners.
Absolutely, because I mean, it's varied across platforms, and so I don't want to, generalize here because they're not all the same. But normally a stream is counted at a certain amount of time, which could be, let's say, 30 seconds, and that's you listen to 30 seconds, and that's a stream. So going back to user-centric might help in what is consumers skipping a lot. So Deezer did some some sort of modeling, impact analysis, where they saw that consumers aged 18 to 24 tend to skip much more. So that means that if you're skipping, but that also counts as a stream, and that's fine. The only problem is that a lot of our classical composers would tell us that, you put something online which is half an hour long, 40 minutes long. Like, how is it possible that pays the same as a 30-second skip? And we definitely think there's some work that could be done here. And again, that's not the way it works all over the place, but we definitely think that sort of the length of a stream should be looked at, and potentially, I don't know, streaming could pay based on length. I mean, there's a lot of different options that could be explored, but there definitely, you know, intuitively seems to be sort of a difference between something that's 40 minutes long and something that's 2 minutes long.
Yeah, because it's the user's choice whether they listen to 30 seconds or 40 minutes, but you can't really only put 30 seconds of a Mozart symphony on and expect people to listen to it.
Exactly. I mean, there were things around it happening, like people sort of splitting up their symphonies into like 3-minute bites or 3-minute tracks. So they were, but you know, that's fine because you can always work your way around the system. But if that's happening, why not make the system work in a way that acknowledges that, do you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, lovely. Oh, well, thank you so much for going into all of these really important issues, and so many of them. I've really enjoyed talking about this in depth. Is there anything else that we've not talked about that you'd like to raise, or any final comments, Naomi?
I think we've actually successfully gone through most of the big issues. I mean, as you say, it's a very complex issue, and this is the thing. It's quite, you know, I hope the select committee get to the bottom of it, and I hope that they get access to information and data that we don't have access to, because one of the things when we set out to start the fixed streaming campaign, we were saying that we need to kind of shed some light into some murky areas of the music industry, and I think that is beginning to happen, so that's really positive. I guess you know, if I can leave something with anyone listening, it's please put a submission in, because you've still got some time. And if you're a performing orchestral musician and you don't receive any streaming royalties, even just putting in something saying that you don't receive anything from it, explaining how you do make your money and explaining why PPL royalties are quite valuable to you, that would be really helpful, because it all helps make the case for equitable remuneration.
Yeah, and we would say the same. I mean, genuinely, the issue around transparency is so important. What we really, as Naomi was saying, what we really hope comes out of this inquiry is definitely the ability to sort of see clearly. You know, I think we've tried to touch upon certain processes that are extremely complex and that we only really, a lot of the time, know about anecdotally, whereas it would be good for, you know, a sort of institutional oversight over certain things that are going on, just to have more information. And yes, we would also encourage anyone listening to submit, and you can just go on the sort of select committee website, and then, or on our website or on the MU's website, and there's links to it. And yes, definitely composers out there, and just creators in general, tell your story and tell the committee how you're impacted by streaming.
Absolutely. Now is the time. Thank you both so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, it's been really fun. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. We'll end it there. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening today. To find out what we're up to, do join our mailing list or follow us on social media. And if you'd like to support the podcast by buying me a coffee, you can do that on buymeacoffee.com. Thank you so much. See you next time.